Dr. Anna Rowland, welcome to the Katie McGrady Show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I was so excited when our friend, well, more your friend than mine. I've only known him a couple years. You've known him for a number of years. Cardinal Czerny, he said, you have to talk to her about Dilexi Te. And I was so thrilled. I actually mentioned it to a few friends and they went, oh my gosh, she is a gem. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. Give us kind of a rundown of who you are and what you get to do and maybe why it's so important that we're including you in this conversation about Pope Leo's first apostolic exhortation.
Sure. So I have a very kind of crazy life that moves in many different directions simultaneously because that's kind of how the Holy Spirit works.
Oh, amen.
In my experience, you lay plans and it all ends up a mess. So in my main day job, I'm a professor of Catholic social thought and practice at the University of Durham in the UK. And I work particularly on notions of the common good, human dignity, solidarity, the option for the poor, all those kind of things. In addition, for about 20 years, I've also worked on the ethics of human migration, which has just become, obviously, when I started working on it, very few people were talking about it. Now everybody's talking about it. So that's been a really interesting journey for me. And then I got asked by Pope Francis 3 years ago whether I would help work on the Synod for Synodality. So I was working on that process, seconded formally to the Vatican for just over 2 years, which finished 2 days after Pope Francis died in slightly eerie timing. So yeah, so I have a kind of slightly crazy life that moves in academic directions, church directions, but also kind of grassroots community directions as well.
You worked very closely with our late Holy Father, and every time I meet somebody who spent time with Pope Francis, I try to find, what was it about him that stood out to you? You knew him personally, you were around him frequently. I had the occasion to meet him a couple times and was always so moved by his warmth. I mean, what do you remember most about him now that we're just about 6 months or so since his death?
Sure. I think it's a combination of his absolute seriousness with his humour and his humanity. And those things were like a combination. Those are not like juxtaposed things, but they were things that integrated in his personality. So he got his energy from people. I remember this time last year, in fact, when he was going off to do all of those crazy trips, and people said, how is he going to manage this? And what they forgot is that he drew his energy from people, from the crowd, from being amongst people. And in a way, I think being behind the walls of the Vatican was almost a form of suffering and a kind of sacrifice for him in many ways, because his orientation was absolutely towards the basic realities of people living in communities, and particularly, obviously, as we know, those on the peripheries, particularly given his own life experience. So for me, it was that, that enormous heart for people. And I think it's no coincidence that the last major document he left us was precisely on the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the need for us to take heart. And obviously the conversation we're having today is about the sequel, if you like, to that document.
Yeah. I'm so struck by the last big thing we got to see him do was ride in the Pope Mobile on Easter Sunday with the people. And a man of the people in so many ways that I think wanted to impress upon us. And if you look back at Dilexi, this idea of how loved you are, what does that then mean about how we love others? Like that was clearly what was coming, right? If he's loving you, how do you then love the people around you? And so today with Dilexi Te, and see, this is going to be the problem. I'm going to get them mixed up because one is the sequel to the other, an apostolic exhortation now given to us by newly elected Leo XIV. We know he arrived at the office. This was on the desk, and of course he's made it his own. Give us kind of a quick shot overview. It's like an hour and a half worth of reading. It is 20,000 words. It is a hefty document from Pope Leo XIV, an Augustinian canonist. I'm not too surprised, but give us kind of the quick shot. If somebody were to bump into you on the elevator and see you have this in your hand and say, "What's that about?" What do you say?
So, two things. I think the first is, in very simple terms, this is a document that is telling us that the option for the poor is, ironically, not optional. So this is love of Christ means love for the poorest. And those two things are inextricably bound together, faith and the option for the poor. So that, in a kind of nutshell, is a core message, and that doesn't go away. So what's extraordinary about the document, and I think actually really helpful and really in a way also echoes the personality of Leo, is it's this really steady, careful trawl sounds too negative almost, but this tracking, this tracing through Christian history from the origins of the Christian community up to where we are now. And it's this steady gaze, this consistency of the church's orientation towards the care for, the love of the poor as a way of meeting Christ at that interface, serving Christ, and being part of the redemption of the world, of moving towards that gift of salvation. So the text really does this extraordinary, here we are with the Jesus of the Gospels, here we are with the early church and its commitment towards the poorest, here we are with the saints of the early church and the church fathers. Then we move into the religious orders and the foundation of the religious orders, and it really does that really beautifully, I think, and really helpfully. It narrates the importance of that variety of charisms that are poured out for the sake of the world. And then it moves us through into the modern period, to the popular movements, and into the social teaching of the church, and right up to the contemporary day. And really importantly, it insists that from a Christian point of view, the poorest are never merely the beneficiaries, the recipients. They are rather subjects, agents in their own history and in our history, that our welfare, if we're not those made materially poor, is bound to those who are made materially poor, and that we all have a common poverty, whether that's a spiritual poverty or also, and I think it names this really pointedly, the poverty that is death, that death itself is a form of poverty that unites all of us. So any of us who think I'm not the poor, the document says you are in ways you may not be recognising. This is a common shared reality. It's multifaceted, multidimensional, and it speaks into the heart of recognising poverty rather than simply shrinking away from it. So for all those reasons, I think it's really helpful.
I'm struck by the idea that there is this history lesson. He tells us, like, from the jump, this is what we're talking about, and then shows us this has always been the church. I'm not introducing some novel idea because of economic inequality and wealth disparity that is very evident in our world today. Which has always been evident in our world, I think is even more visible at this precise moment because we're more connected than we've ever been, which is causing its own form of poverty in this false connections that we are imagining we have all this, I can talk to people all over the world and I can see what everybody else is doing, and that's actually harming us. But that he's able to give this historical analysis almost as like proof positive, you don't get to run away from this. I read it and I couldn't help but think, this is Leo taking us to school. Because I think we're being subtly called out that maybe the church has drifted from this. And I mean the church, not just the institutional church, but the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, the body of Christ has drifted from that. What sense did you get? I mean, not a call out in like we're being fussed at, like we're not being taken to school to be judged or to be punished, but that we're being challenged. Like now more than ever, you should be paying attention to this.
I would say that what I think he realises about human nature is that we always pull away from this reality. We find it shocking and difficult and disturbing that we are called to place ourselves within our own poverties and also to recognise and tend to the poverties of others. There's something in our nature that kind of recoils from that recognition. So sure, there are ways in which in the current age there are vast inequalities of wealth, and Leo pointed that out even in relation to Elon Musk, the other day, picking on him quite pointedly, it should be said. But there are many instances of that kind of gross inequality of wealth that just sits ill at ease with that gospel message. But I think Leo's saying that this happens in every generation. We're not unique and we're not special in that regard, but there are particular markers and hallmarks in our own era that really are warning signs to us of perhaps a disordered reality that we need to address. But I also think, just to go back to the beginning of that question that you asked, because I think this is really important and you're absolutely right, there is almost nothing new in this text.
Yeah.
That's one of the most surprising and brilliant things about it. There is nothing new. If you're a journalist or a pundit who picks up this text and you've got that kind of, I just want to scan this quickly to see, so what's this guy saying that's different or new? You're going to be disappointed because there is nothing which is inherently novel from a theological or ecclesiological perspective in this text. It is a simple, careful, steady, determined, resilient narration. It's a testament to Christian history and Christian witness. And that in itself is a remarkable thing in our moment. So it shows what does change, which is not in this regard the teaching of the church. The action of the church evolves over time because we have to witness historically in different ways, in different eras. But the teaching of the church in this regard has not changed. What changes are the ideologies that invent new forms of poverty, that kind of present us with sort of the endless invention of forms of human objectification and so forth. So that's what changes, not the teaching of the church in this regard. And I think it's, again, there's something of Leo's own character in that. I think the steadiness, the constancy, the quiet determination in an age where there is an awful lot of sound and noise, where there is movement and disruption and shifting of tectonic plates and a real sense of upheaval. There is something steady and consistent and gentle, a quiet voice calling. And for me, that has real depth to it. And I find that a very helpful thing. When I first started to read the text, I have to say, I thought, hang on a minute. Well, it's almost quite disconcerting that it's quite so steady and quite so carefully consistent, that it is this testament. But actually, by halfway through, I kind of thought, I think this is a really, really helpful thing. We're in the process of inventing these new kind of techno-feudalisms, these new narratives that effectively want to keep us or lock us in places of gross inequality. And I think the consistency of this careful message is something that cuts through, in effect, what is in fact so changeable within our environment.
Quiet steadiness is, I think, the hallmark of the Leonine era so far, even as people have tried to suck him into some soundbite moments and make it seem like he's rocking the boat, or ideological sides try to pull him in and be like, he's ours. There was one line that's already kind of gaining some traction from chapter 75 or paragraph 75. The church, like a mother, accompanies those who are walking. Where the world sees threats, she sees children. Where walls are built, she builds bridges. She knows that her proclamation of the gospel is credible only when it is translated into gestures of closeness and welcome. And she knows that in every rejected migrant, it is Christ himself who knocks at the door of the community. That seems like a pointed line from the Holy Father at a time when there is a lot of rejection of migrants in the culture. As somebody who studies this, who talks about this, what does that line mean to you?
So, first of all, that is a line that could have come out of the mouth of Pope Francis. It's a line that could have come out of the mouth of John Paul II. It's a line that simply, I think, is a confession of a consistent tradition of reflection on the question of migration that you can trace back, in a sense, to the earliest church, but very certainly to the beginning of the era of the mass movement of human beings in the 1800s. Before the origins of Rerum Novarum, before pen was put to paper in drafting Rerum Novarum, there was already a corpus of teaching on the question of migration. And this is entirely consistent as a comment within that tradition. It looks pointed because of where we are, because of who we are, but it's not pointed in relation to the tradition. So it challenges us, I think, to say, where is our gaze coming from? And that is a word that both Leo uses and Francis used as well. Where is our political gaze coming from, such that we would see that line as being so pointed and so challenging? It puts the mirror back on us rather than on the papacy. That's a totally consistent line. It's not original to Leo in that sense. And how could he say otherwise?
Right. I mean, that's the church. It's not. It's surprising only if you yourself are maybe bothered by this idea of welcome, I think.
Yeah, or if you know, we are all products of our culture in ways that go much deeper than we realise. We breathe in the air around us, and we're not always conscious of the way in which that forms us. So I think, one of the things that our era is telling us is to be very afraid of those who are different culturally, who come from outside. And that's partly because we've absorbed certain narratives which are not inherently gospel narratives. They're political narratives. Therefore, they can be discussed and contended. They can be debated, and that's absolutely fine. So it's not an attempt to silence that debate, but we have to recognise that they're not inherently gospel narratives, which tell us that we're in an austere moment. We're in a moment of severe competition for resources and goods, that what we need to do is kind of lock down various forms of territorial privilege, of material privilege, of cultural privilege, and that effectively is sort of the battle and the struggle of the moment. And I think we have to recognise that that is a arguable political narrative that belongs in the space of contestation, of free speech, but it is not the gospel perspective. And what we have to do is ask, how is our gaze being formed? How do we look upon the world? And what does it mean as Christians to gaze upon the world as Christ gazes upon the world? To look at another human being as Christ would look at that human being. And then we have to have political conversations about how we organise community, how we divide up goods, how we steward creation. We have to have all of those conversations together as a plural political community. But the task of the Pope is to train our gaze on the world through the eyes of Jesus Christ. Solely. That's it. That's the task of the Pope. Everything else is then a matter of how Christians, particularly lay Christians, engage in a world where we have a responsibility for shaping those plural and contestable narratives with a Christian lens, without it being a matter of simple imposition, but rather of witness freely given in a world where truth is being negotiated together with those of difference.
Dr. Anna Rowland, where can people follow you and read more of, I'm sure, the analysis you're going to offer on this document and the great work that you're doing?
Well, hilariously, I used to be on what is now X, and I failed given that I'm 50 years old, you see, I'm like the wrong techno generation. So I got locked out because I didn't have multi-factor authentication.
Oh, no.
Somebody said to me, what happened that you disappeared in this month from X, as if there was a big drama? And there was no big drama. I just hadn't set up multi-factor authentication. So at the moment, I'm having a kind of break from social media.
Yeah.
So that which actually has really helped me in all sorts of ways. I think there's a really important witness in being in that space. So I tend to write and publish, but I'm doing that largely through kind of conventional media forms at the moment. And sometimes some forms of silence imposed, even by the failure of multi-factor authentication, provide for a clarity of mind and thought.
I love it. Well, hopefully you'll get back on there soon, because I think your voice is so necessary and is very, very welcome in helping us understand all of this. Dr. Anna Rowland, thank you so much for taking the time to join us to talk about this new document. We're going to post a link, folks, so you can go read it yourself. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.